That's enough coding for now. Post-Void is an interesting FPS game created by YCJY Games, and from the looks of it, it might be one of the weirdest things that they've done. I found this on a certain unnamed Chinese image board and heard the term schizo floating around for these types of games that look weird or out there, and I think that's a little inaccurate. The game is super straightforward, and it's just a visual style that's going to put people off. I personally like games that are ballsy when it comes to abstract visuals, and I wanted to give it a chance. This game is addicting. It's crack.
Well, this is a big bag of drugs. And all I'm going to do is just tape it on here like this. Oh, and then, you know, have fun!
Drugs. Drugs. Drugs!
Let's start from the very beginning. You play as a guy stuck in between worlds, or was it the post-void? I think. I don't know. I didn't pay enough attention. And besides, you're not playing this game for the story anyway. You have to speed through surreal, labyrinthine, and seemingly endless hallways while fending off some of the more inspired enemies that you'd see in a game over and over again, until you get it right. Graphically, it's incredibly simple in its technical design. It has the whole Doom era aesthetic down, though it does have one major flaw, and it's that it doesn't fully rotate the sprites. Everything's like a pop-out picture book, where it'd be okay to look at from one angle, but after that, so often you'd find the sprites blend into the world, because you may be above them, or have just ran past them. It gets annoying sometimes, and I'm probably being a pedantic fuck about it, seeing as it actually doesn't occur all that often, but it's still something to note. But visually, this game is a treat, for weirdos like me anyway. While there's no over-the-top effects or high-fidelity textures or anything, what we got here is style over substance. A lot of the enemies would have reminded me of the monsters that Francis Bacon would have painted, and the world kinda complements all that. With the large, almost seemingly endless hallways. When I was checking through all the files for Post-Void, I found a little PDF that contained all the concept art for the game, and honestly, it's pretty neat. But there's even smaller things that I truly appreciate about the design, like the lack of any unnecessary UI, or like how the game tells you you're changing acts, or when you die. The game is dripping with its own unique sense of style. Some people will probably find it hard to look at. However, if you're a fan of games with weird and unique visual styles, like Cruelty Squad, I'll finish that video one day, or Killer 7, you might feel right at home. Not that it's ugly, it's just that it's a bit out there. I'll be very brief with the sound section because there's not too much to write home about. All the weapons in the game sound pretty generic. In fact, that's the case with all the sound effects. I think they were taken from some generic sound library. In fact, yeah, in the credits it says so. They've just been modified slightly. Not that that's bad. It's just not as memorable as the rest of the game. It's serviceable. Though there's one thing that I think they did really fucking well. And that's the soundtrack. Well, song? Maybe? But that song is good enough to get your blood flowing. It's written by a guy called Carl Floden. He's done soundtracks for games like Totally Accurate Battlegrounds and Cluster Truck. So definitely check him out if you want to hear more. The gameplay. If I could put it so simply and eloquently, it's like creaming yourself and then cleaning it all up with a velvet sock. It's just a super tight experience. The core mechanic and death mechanic revolves around a thing called the idol. That's a little face in your left hand. It's essentially your health meter. Over time it leaks yogurt, and believe me, it's not that yummy at all. If enemies damage you, you lose a bit of health, but how do you get it back? By killing enemies and finishing the level. Holy shit, we got a good loop here. Because the system is focusing on keeping your momentum and only slowing you down to maybe circle strafe, or if you get trapped by one of these titty goblins. You've got limited movement options, but you're moving at a breakneck speed anyway, so it doesn't really matter. You've got your basic things like a jump, which does get more use in the later levels, and a slide, which will give you a burst of speed, and keep you below enemies' firing lines. That's right, you can slide under the bullets, and it feels fucking great when you do. At the end of each level, you get a pick and upgrade for the next floor. You get an optional tree, and believe me, most of the options you got here are pretty excellent. Sometimes you got an option to pick a new weapon too. We'll get into that. The gunplay is simple, it's not hyper flashy, but that's the case with most retro throwback shooters. But it can be satisfying. Landing headshots creates a suitable amount of gore, and generally enemies go down pretty quickly. You only have a few options as far as weapon diversity goes, 4 in total. You got the standard pistol. You start every single run with this. If you really want to, you can just run the entire game with it, and that's perfectly fine. The pistol is pretty accurate, and it doesn't kick like a mule, but it has low damage in comparison to the rest of the weapons. But I do enjoy my time with it, until you have to eventually replace it. Then there's the SMG. I know a lot of people swear by this, saying it breaks the game, especially with the upgrades. With rubber bullets and explosive rounds, it can be pretty devastating, but I'll be honest, it doesn't feel well in the hand. It recoils too much, and it's just really hard to control. It does okay damage, but that's it. You can get some fun out of it if you build yourself right, but in its base form, it just doesn't feel right. Then you got the shotgun. Like any good throwback shooter, Post Void's got an excellent shotgun. It's a fucking beast. You can decimate groups of enemies. It can be one hell of a time. Then there's the knife. The knife to me was the most underwhelming weapon in the game. It's certainly a challenge-based weapon, and it can be good if you're swarmed, but the whole charge mechanic just felt a little bit awkward to me. It's the only weapon in the game that can't handle a few of the traits. Though, the few times I really built into it, I had a lot of fun. Like the shotgun, you can just decimate crowds of enemies. Speaking of enemies, the enemy designs are simple. Don't expect the most complex AI over here. Generally, you have 2 types of enemies, that being the swarm type of enemy and the ranged. The game expects you to annihilate everything in your path. Overcomplicating the AI would have ruined the fun, which is why some of the late game enemies suck, like these roly bastards. Same with these guys. These remind me of the flying things in Half-Life 2, and they're just as annoying. They don't do all that much damage, but they slow you down a bit, which can fuck you up. My advice is, if you see this button right here, always click it. And lastly, we have these hands. They're the worst. While they do no damage to you, they'll try to swarm you and set off a flashbang. That literally can be run ruining. Just try to keep your distance against them, I guess. You'll do fine. The levels are procedurally generated, and they're more of a track without giving you any options of where to go. Sometimes you might hit a dead end, or head down the wrong path, and that just might mean life or death. Even if it's only a second away from the correct path, the compass is a good unlock for this, assuming you have no problems navigating the level anyway. But sometimes that's easier said than done, especially with these guys, but it's a decent quality of life thing. Other than that, the rooms really don't make sense. Long waving corridors, weird furniture and paintings on the wall. It definitely stands out visually, and it complements what the game's going for, but it'll always make you longing for more. And that's the thing with Post Void. It just makes you want more. More guns, more traits, more enemies, more music. It lacks a few quality of life features that I would have loved to have seen. For example, the game doesn't have native ultrawide support, nor does it have an FOV slider. But here's the catch, the game's only €2.50, or your regional equivalent. That's the cost of a can of Monster, or 2 Eurosaver burgers from McDonald's, or 2 €1 cans. That's a half a bag of cans. I wanted to buy the OST for the game, and it just turns out, to buy the one track that's in the game, it's actually the same price as the game. And the game goes on sale from time to time. I think I've made it very clear now that this game is dirt cheap. So what can I say? I just hope at some point the dev revisits the concept and just makes something bigger and better with it. Right now, for the price, it's totally worth it. I just want more, and that's a great feeling to have after beating a game.